Hello? Hello. Okay, that's all good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Asbury Oral History Showcase. We are proud of the narrators that we are assembling here today to give you just a bit of their stories. Because that's the only way, as we know, that history grows, experience grows, knowledge grows by telling, sharing, and continuing to share our stories. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge and thank quite a few people beyond this year's narrators. I see in the audience we have 3 of last year's narrators. We have Josephine Baker, we have General Audrey Drake, and we have Dr. Clyde Callender. So let's give them a hand for their lives, their work, and for sharing with us today. To put a program on like this, as you all know, it takes a lot of work. I want to thank Ruth Robinson, who is our project team leader. Ruth is here today in some unbearable circumstances in terms of sadness that she's had in her family. Ruth, we thank you for coming here through your loss and being with us today for your work. To these unsung heroes here, Adelle and Kelvin Child. Adelle Banks and Kelvin Child, I'm telling you, I don't know if they ever sleep. Adelle is one of these 24-hour people. Don't get an email from her and expect not to answer back, or do it like 3 seconds, okay? So be ready to deal. Ms. Carol Travis, who's a narrator today, but who also is in that office making sure that many of the things that we need in the request for this project have happened on time. Our wonderful AV teams, JC back here, and of course the members of the, the Asbury Archives and History Committee, who have made this an important priority for the church. On our team this year, conducting interviews and doing video work, Adelle, myself, Pandit, Wright, Duane Williams, and Sandy, my mind is losing me, Adams, mine is in trouble anyway, have been our partners. We've been partners throughout the whole project. And of course, this program is possible from a grant by the DC Oral History Collaborative. So the work goes on between the Historical Society, the Public Library, and ourselves, making this an ongoing, we hope, project. So we want to move quickly, so I'm going to bring Ruth Robinson up to do the introductions, and as you can see from the program, you'll be hearing from Adelle and Kelvin after that. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see you here this evening. This midday. Pandit made most of the introductions, so she's made my job light. But I do want to thank everybody on the team. They work so hard. They work night and day, and I mean night. The emails have been flying all night long trying to pull this together. But it's been work of love. I know it has been for me. I enjoy doing this kind of thing, and it's very fulfilling. But I would like to impress on everybody how important it is to record your history. Pandit mentioned that I've had a loss, and that's when you think about your history and what you need to do to obituaries and that sort of thing. So I strongly encourage you, if you can do it, to do your history, your family histories now. Start talking about what you know, who you know, and what you've done in your life. So I'm just going to go down this a bit because, as I mentioned, Pandit has covered most of this. But our narrators are, as she mentioned, Carol Travis, and she is the executive assistant to the African American Methodist Heritage Center. And she's also retired Verizon Human Resource Senior Organization Development Specialist, and her talents are so useful here. Then we have Carol Thompson Cole, who is the president of Venture Philanthropy Partners. We have Robert Mallett. He is the president of Africare. We have Bill Johnson, who was the former director of the DC Department of Environmental Services. And one of our narrators had another engagement and was not able to be here with us, and that's Leonard Haynes. And he's the senior director of U.S. Education Department's Institutional Services. So I just want you to sit back and enjoy. Adelle and Kelvin are going to give you some background about this project and pulling it all together. So if you could come on up now.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Asbury United Methodist Church is grateful for the opportunity to work again with the DC Oral History Collaborative. The DC OAC is a partnership project of the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., Humanities DC, and the DC Public Library. Asbury was fortunate enough to receive a partnership grant from the DC Oral History Collaborative in 2018. This was a great match for their interests and ours, as we had already begun an archive of oral histories of Asbury in 2014. And the DC OAC wanted to identify such collections from all over the district. The grant covers expenses related to recording, videotaping, editing, transcribing, and preserving the narratives provided by our interview subjects. I joined the team as the grants writer, which called for me to write the content of our application to the DC OAC and our follow-up and final reports. We made our first application in 2017, but it was not approved. However, with guidance from Magda Lemire, the DC OAC's consulting oral historian for community engagement, we applied again in 2018, and that application was approved. After we completed our first round of interviews, that December, the DC OAC notified those who had been awarded grants that was offering extension grants for 2019, providing additional funding so that they can continue preserving the original stories of Washington in the voices of the district residents. Asbury gladly applied, as it was easy for us to identify worthy narrators with much of interest to say about life in Washington and their association with Asbury. We submitted our application in January and learned March 1 and it was approved. And we quickly went to work because the grant period runs from March 12th to September 30th. And today, we share the results with you. Thank you for coming.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to Asbury's Oral History Showcase today. It is an honor to present what our oral history team has been working on this year. My name is Adelle Banks. I started conducting oral histories of Asburyans in 2014, and by 2017 had completed 17, starting with Bishop in Residence Forrest Stitt, and then including lay members, educators, DC government employees, and people active on different levels of the United Methodist Church. Most have been video interviews, but some have been solely audio interviews. And the DC Oral History Collaborative has noted Asbury's oral history collection in its survey of collections. I also have done dozens of oral history interviews for the African American Methodist Heritage Center, including Joseph Lowry and James Lawson for that center's private collection. So the question we hope to answer today is why oral history? The basic reason is that it allows people to tell their stories themselves in their own words, providing a record that no one else can, while they still can. As I sit with the people being interviewed, who are officially called narrators, I am hearing witnesses to history and hope to eventually share their personal slices of history with others. This is one of the rare opportunities to do that publicly. 2 years ago, I had presented snippets of Asbury's oral histories when I was on a panel at the annual conference on DC history with others who had been trained by the DC Oral History Collaborative. Some audio clips were played of my 2017 interview with Sandra Kingshaw, may she rest in peace, who was a member of a Girl Scout troop at Asbury and later was one of the first Black area managers of the Girl Scout Council in the DC area. Now you will get a bit of the finished product of the 2019 interviews done by our team. Just like in 2018, Pandit, Wright interviewed 3 people and I interviewed 2. It has been a multi-step process to get where we are today. As he explained, my husband Kelvin Childs applied for the DC Oral History Collaborative Grant with input from other Asburians. Just like the previous year, our oral history team made plans for interviews whether we received the grant or not, and we appreciate having the collaborative support. And as you have heard, our team included Ruth Robinson, who has shepherded our fulfilling of the grant requirements, and Sandy Adams and Duane Williams, who served as videographers, photographers, and one of them is doing so even now. Over the last couple of years, all of us have attended workshops and training to learn best practices in oral history and the specifics for grant recipients. Pandit and I researched our narrators and had pre-interviews with them to prepare all of us for the upcoming interviews. And by the summer, we interviewed our 5 narrators, some at Asbury and some at their homes. We then created transcripts of the interviews, reviewed each other's transcripts, and shared them with the narrators to check them for accuracy, spelling, and other input. I edited video clips that will be shown to you momentarily, and I hope to make these clips combined in YouTube playlists public soon so that you'll be able to share them with others by searching for Oral History and Asbury United Methodist Church. Today you will see a sampling of the clips, and others could be public soon. We thank the narrators for their willingness to share their stories, and we hope that they will give you new insights about our church, our community, and the fields to which they have contributed. So we're about to begin with the clips, and I will briefly introduce each set. We will start with Bill Johnson, a retired longtime DC government employee who served in several departments, and former Asbury lay leader, whose clips deal with the 1963 March.
Back in 1963, after the March on Washington, President Kennedy ordered the DC commissioners, which there were 3, we did not have on the other. We had 3 commissioners running the city. And President Kennedy ordered those 3 commissioners to do a high-profile job of recruiting and hiring Afro-Americans in professional jobs. And I, as a result, became the recipient of that. I was one of many who were hired from that presidential edict. As a matter of fact, I became the first Afro-American engineering construction inspector for the old Department of Sanitary Engineering. I went to work the first week in September of '63, just 2 weeks following the March on Washington and the presidential edict to the commissioners. I was a direct beneficiary of that. And I'm trying to have somewhat of a celebrity status because I was the only black engineering construction company we had. It's since got more, but I was the first one.
So before you tell me more about that, I want to go back to something you just said,
Sure.
Which is March on Washington. Were you part of it? What was your role in it? If you were, what do you remember of that in Washington and at the march?
I had, I guess, 15 or 20 close friends at that time, and we all decided that we were going to gather at 7th and E Northeast at one of our friends' homes, have breakfast, and then walk to the march site. And we did just that. Long walk from 7th and E Northeast all the way to the Lincoln Memorial. And but we did. We made it. We had a good time. And we were in this classic march down Constitution Avenue once we got our placards and signs. It was a great day. I never, ever moved that.
Do you remember what your placard said or any of your signs?
Jobs, jobs, jobs. And I didn't know I was going to be a recipient of jobs in the district government. I didn't even consider the district government because things were kind of back up back then.
Do you remember the crowd? Do you remember the speeches?
Oh, yeah. Crowds were overwhelming. I happened to be, our group we decided to be on the southwest end of the reflector pool, as close to the steps as we could get. So we were right on the corner of the reflector pool and the steps before, in front of it, the monument. And it was a great day. I never will forget.
And everyone remembers or recalls I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. Is that something that stands out most for you or something else?
Well, that stood out as well, but there were other speeches that I thought deserved a lot of merit. Congressman from Georgia,
John Lewis?
John Lewis. I thought his speech was right on time, despite the fact that they made him rewrite it several times before they would accept and let him read it and deliver it. But it was just a great time. A lot of singing and rejoicing, but we had no idea that Martin Luther King was going to give such an epic sermon, speech that day. It was all a surprise. I think about 3 years into my new employment with the district government, the old Department of Sanitary Engineering, I won the first numerous awards from organizations and community groups. And this particular night was awards night for the Modern Cities organization. The Modern Cities was a well-defined part of Washington that was carved out to develop plans, programs, and activities to make a better inner city for Washington. And based on my work in my department of civil engineering, I received one of the Model Cities Awards and was invited to the award luncheon. And I sat beside Reverend Frank Williams. I did not know him, he did not know me, but you know, when you're at these awards banquets and you're at the head table, you know, you talk to people on both sides of it. Well, Reverend Williams dominated that whole conversation. First of all, we want to know, did I attend church? And I said, no, but I'm still looking around. I told him about my experience, my original experience at Asbury when I was in the Army. And I just, somehow or another, did not connect well, for whatever reasons. And I don't really think it's important at this point, because after talking with Reverend Frank Williams at this luncheon, he insisted that I come and give Asbury a second chance. And I did. April 1977 is when I officially joined Asbury.
What are some of your earliest memories of your time in Asbury, which would have been from the late 70s on?
Well, back in 1977, Asbury, at that point, had a very large membership.
What's very large?
I would say in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,400 people. And the challenge to me was to try to meet as many of those people as I could. And sometimes I was successful, sometimes I wasn't.
Then you also were a lay leader for a period of time in
Yes.
the 90s?
Yes, I was a lay leader for 2 or 3 years. That's normally a 3-year stint, but I only did 2 because Reverend Matthews wanted me to do something else. And so, but I enjoyed being around it, and enjoyed leading some where I had a chance to deliver a lay message. And I hope the folks enjoy this.
Why did you like being a lay leader?
Well, I saw visions of my father, because my father was a lay leader at our church back in Kentucky for a long, long time. I'm not so sure they had terms then. Because my father was a lay leader forever. Whether that was real or not, I don't know. But I saw visions of my father when I accepted that job, because I thought that I would try to do as good a job as he did back home at our church, which was also named Asbury Methodist Church.
Are there events at Asbury that had special meaning for you?
Well, Men's Day is a highlight of our activities, one. Two, we developed a kinship and a relationship with the DC Boys Choir, which we did not have. I was instrumental in getting them to come to Asbury. The director of that choir is an Hamiltonian as well, and so it was a natural connection that we developed a relationship, and we had, and we contributed a lot of money to them, helping them, go abroad and even travel throughout the United States. We've helped with their effort, and we continue to help with that effort. As a matter of fact, we've adopted the DC Boys Choir, and the director of the steward is quite happy with our participation, cooperation, and efforts.
Next, we will learn about Leonard Haynes III, a longtime educator in DC and nationwide, and currently in the U.S. Education Department. He will discuss his speeches at Asbury, his memories of the Washington area in the 1970s, and his sense of some of the divisions in the District of Columbia. Dr. Haynes is unable to be with us in person due to a board meeting at Ohio State University.
I think the Men's Day is very important. Men get a chance to express themselves. I had the privilege of speaking at Men's Day breakfast a couple of years ago. I really enjoyed that. Got a great response to what I had to say.
Do you remember what you talked about?
Education.
What was your main message to them?
We need more. And we need to be more competitive if we're going to be successful. And there's a role for religion in that space.
What do you mean?
Help you focus. And you have to have faith in your capabilities to do these things. Religion is basically a question of faith. You either believe it or you don't.
And that can undergird your desire to pursue an education and stick with it?
Correct. You're not going to be successful with that. Not in this society.
You also spoke about the significance of HBCUs during Asbury's HBCUs and Greek Organization Sunday,
Yes.
I believe in 2018.
Yes.
What is it like to bring this message that you have basically preached for years to your own congregation?
Well, the message I was trying to convey as the United Methodist Church has been key to the development of the historical Black college community. And I named all the schools, the colleges that are connected to the United Methodist Church to remind the congregation who they were. Because I think many of our members don't know. And part of the problem that we have is people who don't know. Not that they're ignorant, but they're just indifferent to what has to happen. And the colleges need our support because they're in the business of training young people to do that. And Black colleges are very, very important. They're in the federal law when people understand that. But if you were founded before 1964 for the express purpose of educating African Americans, the federal government has designated you as a historical Black college. So you're in the federal law. You're not a race-based institution. You're not a suspect class. Unlike Hispanic institutions, in the quotas, there's nothing. They're historical how what they are. They are historical. And they deserve the undivided attention of the nation. Without them, we've got to create. That's how we made a tremendous difference in this country.
What do you remember about DC?
Washington, well, my office was on S Street, so I was in the city all the time.
This was at the Institute for Services and Education?
Yes, and then I was there for 3 years, and then I went down to the Land Association, which they do myself. So I was always in Washington. Marion very well. First when I got here, Carol Washington, he was the first. Walter was the first mayor.
Walter Washington.
And then Marion came after him.
Marion Barry.
Yeah. So it was kind of an interesting time in D.C. They were in the process of building the subway system, digging up stuff. And a lot of people running around with business cards, getting in touch with how do I say this, the government workers. DC government folk.
It was thriving.
Yeah. And I gotta tell you, what struck me about the area, I was in Sligo Park one day, and I saw a group of black men, young guys, my age, playing touch football. So I went over and joined the game. And then someone got hurt during the game. And then I heard this statement. Stay right where you are, man. Let me go get my bag. Yeah, I said, what is that talking about? And then this other guy said, no, man, my car is closer. Let me get my bag. What was here, I noticed for 2 internal medicine guys. One was a special, and that told me you're in a different area. I have never been around 11 black medical doctors in my life in one place. I'll never forget that experience. I had a PhD that's never been a different area. This doesn't exist anywhere else.
This was in the mid-1970s?
Yeah. 77, 78. Running the city. I came back after serving as acting president Grambling. I had United Directors there. I was running the school, running Grambling. I came back. Connie Newman, who was the vice chair of the control board, asked me to go to DC Public Schools to help the superintendent. And so all in Akron, the superintendent. So I was her senior advisor. And that's how I got to know how DC Public Schools actually operates. And that was an eye-opening experience. It wasn't about 2 kids, it was about something else. So I know who they are. They know one, but they still around. I'm thankful. But DC got issues. And the school system, as I said, it was a school system, but these were all people.
It's all one name, but within the divisions within the city occur within the education aspect.
It's not rocket science. I mean, I took a group of 5th graders in DC Public Schools out to American University for a program. I had quarterly orders, groups. I got a quarterly speak course. And I'll never forget that ride on the bus. We got going up Mass Avenue, these are all black kids. Mr. Haynes, where are we? I said, we're in DC. No, out of state. We ain't know this existed. They got off the bus at AU. Never seen it. Then out in Spring Valley, all the blacks who work for the water company, they have the picture ID on the outside of this shirt. It's going on still.
But what you just described was in the 1980s, 90s?
2000.
Around year 2000.
They ain't changed. I left DC Public School in 2001. I was the principal for the day at the school in Northeast Washington. They're calling it Minor Elementary. That morning, I was still working DC Public School. I was principal for the day. I get in the office, and the receptionist said, "Mr. Haynes, welcome to Minor." As a little boy, like in third grade. Your first thing you gotta do this morning, you gotta talk to the switch. She held up a big rock. He threw this at one of our teachers this morning and just barely missed it. I went to the little kid. You did what? Yeah. I said, come on with me. So we went in the office. I said, why did you do this? He wouldn't speak. I said, give me your mama's name. Tell her I'm going to call her. He said, I don't have mama. Call my grandma. I called her on the phone. I said, I have your grandson. And then she said, what has he done now? I said, he just got put out not long ago. Y'all going to put him out again? I said, where is his mama? She's on crack. So the reality of the urban experience jumped at me. That this is what we deal with every day. So how can you educate kids in this kind of environment? Well, he thinks he did nothing wrong. Somewhere around here, I had that rock always killed. I don't know if it's around here somewhere. Maybe downstairs. But it just reminds me of where we got to go.
We will hear from Carol Travis, an employee of the African American Methodist Heritage Center and retiree of Verizon Communications. Her clips reveal her thoughts on African American role models, her work as a trainer at the phone company, and her roles as a church employee.
Can you talk about any experiences that you ever had with segregation, either growing up or as a young person
Sure.
here?
My grandmother was real cute and very stylish. And as the oldest and the only girl grandchild, I spent a lot of time with her because my parents worked. And I remember my grandmother wanting to shop at Jellif's, which was a store in Washington, D.C., that we could not go into
As black folks. And even when we could go into Jellif's after the segregation laws lessened, I guess is a good word, she would never shop there because she said, I will not give them any of my money because I could not go in there as an adult. So I grew up with a lot of that. No, it really did not. As I mentioned, we had all black teachers. All of our role models were people of color. And no, it didn't have an impact because I didn't want for anything. My grandmother or my mother, father went someplace else and bought what we needed.
And in school, I know that your first school was Douglas Simmons
Yes.
Elementary School. Now, as I look that up, you can't find anything
No.
anymore, except there is an online reunion site for alumni of Douglas Simmons. Where was the school?
The school was at, I'm closing my eyes, I'm trying to remember. The school was at 1st and Pierce Streets, Northwest. Walker Jones is near there now. And the interesting thing, at Douglas Simmons, there was a member of Asbury who was one of my teachers. So it was just interesting. So I always had African-American role models that I could always look up to.
And you were christened at Asbury?
Yes.
How did that happen?
I had an aunt who was a longtime member of Asbury. My parents did not attend church at that time. My grandmother was Catholic, my great-grandmother was Baptist, and my aunt Bertha would brought my brother and I to church every week. So I've been here since probably the late 40s. As a matter of fact, someone gave me a program that I prayed an offertory prayer in 1952, and I was 6 years old. At Asbury. And
And the people of the church helped mentor you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And people say to me all the time that the 11 o'clock hour is the most segregated hour in the city. And I always push back on that because I attend Asbury because I want to attend Asbury. I can go anywhere else that I want, but I choose to come here because it is a place where I was taught, nurtured, groomed, and I don't feel that I could have gotten that anyplace else but an African American church. To work for the C&B Telephone Company at that time because I needed to work. And it was an interesting career choice because the phone company ended up paying for both of my degrees. And my first degree was in marketing and management, I believe, marketing and management. But I went on to teach adults at the phone company for a long time. And it was interesting because at that time, African Americans, and I'm using all the terms interchangeably, were segregated in certain kinds of professions. People were operators, clerks. We cleaned the buildings, but few of us were in anything above lower management. So I really, later on, started to educate African Americans in the corporation and teach them how to deal in the corporation, how to be effective in the organization. So I went on to teach adults for maybe about 10 years of my career.
This was as part of the training department?
Yes.
For informal networks?
Informal networks and part of the training department, yes.
And you enjoyed it? That
I
was
loved
something to manipulate that system, to navigate the system successfully as you did.
Yeah, we did. We had several white upper-level managers who were very interested in our development. Several of my mentors have gone on to do great things. Del Lewis, who became an ambassador to one of the African countries. Bruce Gordon, who ended up being one of the presidents of the NAACP. They were mentors to me. And under their leadership, a group of us started something called the Black Managers Telephone Association. And we actually brought black managers into our training and development organization and taught them how to deal with exclusion, with racism, with being prepared. So that really sort of started in my high school, wanting to help people.
Was this during the Verizon years? Was this after the merger or even before that?
Even before that, we started to do that work. I don't know whether the work is still being done in the corporation or not, but we saw a void in what black folks were doing and what black folks could do in the corporation.
And just talk a little bit about, many people won't understand the history of the mergers of the phone company in Washington. So it was C&P?
It was Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company. The next merger, I believe, took us to Bell Atlantic, and we were up and down the East Coast. Our third merger went to Verizon, which was a national organization at that point. Always enjoyed the people part of working in the church. Probably the most memorable job I had was the 7 years I spent at Mount Vernon Place, United Methodist Church, which is the church located a block down the street from us. And it was interesting. I tell folks all the time, I had all the keys to all the doors where African Americans could not have in previous years. So it was an interesting assignment. Because of segregation. Because of segregation.
The church was segregated.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe you must talk more about that.
Well, Asbury and Mount Vernon were a block apart. Both of them were segregated at that time. Mount Vernon Place had probably 2,000 or 3,000 members. Asbury probably had maybe 2,000 members on the rolls. We have 1,000 people still on our rolls. I'm sure we had 2,000 people at that time. But Asbury was the mecca, I guess. And I really don't want to use that term, because people still want to throw that in our faces. But Asbury was one of the premier churches, I guess. We had a lot of people who came to Washington who wanted to join Asbury, African Americans. Mount Vernon Place had an equal number of white folks. And we didn't do a lot of things together.
Why did they hire you?
Because I was good. I'd also established a relationship with the pastor, who is still a good friend of mine. I consider her a friend. And I was qualified.
And that happened through the work with the Heritage Center, or just how did your paths initially?
Well, I worked at Asbury for about 2 years. I worked at another United Methodist Church, Good Hope Union in Silver Spring. So after I left Mount Zion, I worked for several other churches. So I was leaving Asbury because Reverend Shockley wanted to hire a full-time person, and I didn't want to work full-time. So Pastor Donna needed an administrative person, so I went to work with her.
So over the years then, the Methodist Church, you were out and involved in various activities where you do come together with other pastors,
sure.
and they were white and black. Okay.
Yes.
So now you have the keys to this establishment, and you were just doing your thing. And you say those 7 years you think were some of the most memorable.
Yes.
Why so?
Well, because I got to talk to people face to face. When I first went to Mount Vernon, they were in the process of redeveloping the church. So they tore down one of the buildings, and the pastor and I were in a trailer that faced the new Marriott Hotel. I loved it. We still talk about trailer times when I see her, because we were able to really greet people face to face, where you can't do that sitting in an office 2 or 3 levels above the building. So I got to really interface with homeless folks, with people in the church, with community organizations, because the church was used for a lot of community activities. When the building was finished, the Wesley Theological Seminary has the 3rd floor in the building, so I interfaced with all of the students who lived there. They also held classes there, so I interfaced with all of the students who went to class, probably for 5 years. So I got to know a lot of the pastors and people who were going into class. I met Pastor Adelle there, who was at Asbury. I'm trying to think of some of the other folks. But I met many of the African American and white pastors who came through there working on their DMins and their doctorates at Wesley.
Thank you, Carol Thompson. Next, we will feature Robert Mallett, President and CEO of Africare, and a former staffer in the DC, a former executive in the DC government and in the Clinton administration, who will talk about joining Asbury after coming to Washington, gentrification in the district, and his work as city administrator.
United Methodist Church. When I first came to the district, I was church shopping. I was going to different places, and I was a person of faith, and I had gone to church when I was in college and law school. My grandmother and that just wouldn't have gone over well if I told them I did not find a church. And I visited lots of churches, and I had a friend who's a preacher in Baltimore, and I was driving to Baltimore sometimes to go to Union Baptist Church, where he was, and where his home church. He suggested to me one day, he said, "Robert, you've been going to churches for like 2 years. Have you been to Asbury?" I said, "No, not yet." He says, "Downtown in 11K, you ought to go over there. You ought to go hear this preacher, Frank Williams. He's almost to retire. You need to go over there." And I went over there one Sunday, and he was preaching, and it was the kind of service I really enjoyed. It was, there was an order to it. There was good music, and it was a a variety of music. There was a versatility in music. And the preaching was pretty good. I thought Frank Williams had done a great job. I said, I gotta come back here. And I did. I came back and I sat next to, the second time I came, I sat next to this lady named Lula Jackson. And I was going to write a check to put in the offering, and I hit it in my pocket. I didn't have a pen. And I was sitting next to her, and we hadn't said very much to each other. And she said, "Do you need a pen?" I said, "Yes." And she handed me a pen. And the pen was a Morris Brown college pen. Well, I had gone to Morehouse, and Morris Brown was in the Atlanta University Center. And I said, "Oh, you went to Morris Brown?" She said, "No, it was a Morehouse pen. I take that back." I said, "Your husband went to Morehouse." She said, "No, but I went to Morris Brown." And we hit up this conversation, and we just began to enjoy each other's company. And I started regularly coming to Asbury. But I did not join the church. That is to say, now people don't join church, they sort of go and see. But at the time, you offer your hand in fellowship. I joined after Reverend Williams had left, and we got a new minister by the name of Josh Hutchins. I continued to attend without becoming a member. But I was pretty regular, and I donated pretty regularly. But I never joined. At the time, you may remember in the mid-'80s, the anti-apartheid movement started in the district where Africare, Trans-Africa, and other organizations, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, were trying to press our administration to enact anti-apartheid legislation. And the marches on the South African embassy started. And as a result, I became a lawyer for the day. People would get arrested. And lo and behold, the day I was lawyer for the day, the pastor of Asbury and the associate minister got arrested that day. And I thought, if they're down here doing this, this is where I need to be a member. And about 3 Sundays later, I joined that church.
And
I lived in the district moved here in 1983.
in 1983.
Mhm.
All right. Let's talk about the change that you have seen. I mean, you were inside of an administration who was trying to deal with getting out of one set of circumstances. What do you see when you look now at the set of circumstances in which the district finds itself today?
Well, we knew it was going to change because we knew it had to change. We just did not know it had to change in the way that it did, and that the change would be quite as fast as it turned out to be. There has been profound gentrification in the district. I used to get my hair cut up on Georgia Avenue. I go up there now, I see condominia, and I see it's a different population walking the street. That is not to say that all gentrification is bad. I don't mean to suggest that. But the city did change in a serious way. Now, it started to change after the services improved, after it started getting a higher tax base. I think Mayor Williams thought that the city needed to grow by at least 100,000 residents because we had been losing middle-class black residents in droves. I think we probably expected some of those middle-class blacks would return. They did not return. What they were replaced by were a number of young, I guess we call them millennial whites now, moving into the center city of the city, and it's almost unaffordable.
So it's a plan that sort of had some unintended consequences, perhaps.
Well, I think the plan was to increase the tax base and to make it more substantial. That was a worthy plan. There was nothing to be critical about that. The city needed that. What I think people didn't fully factor in was that you wouldn't get an influx of middle-class blacks coming back to the city. They'd made their homes elsewhere. But we got a lot of single millennials. Now you got Latinos, you got African Americans. The city is very diverse. You got mostly young white millennials. It's a very diverse and different city now, and very dynamic. And I'm not the one to suggest that anything has been bad about strengthening your tax base to allow you to offer more services to people in need, improve the quality of your services. You are concerned about people who are displaced, that they have nowhere to go, and people who are service employees who cannot afford housing. That is a very major issue, and is something that I think the city leaders perhaps should have paid more attention to. When Sharon lost the mayorship, I was not likely to stay a second term. What I didn't say was 8 months as principal deputy corporation counsel, I got a promotion to city administrator because the city administrator moved, left the administration, and Sharon went searching for a new one and selected me. I, to this day, have no idea how or why she made that decision. Maybe I know what she said, but it was the one job I can say that I've had that was hard. It was hard not because it required more smarts, though it did require smarts. It was hard because you were always working. There was never a point at which, as a city administrator or as the mayor, where you weren't on, where people can call you in the middle of the night and you've got to move, you've got to do something. And then everybody knew you. So everywhere you went, you go to a party, they had a problem that, I took to taking a little notepad to come back on Monday to try to respond to some of the people that I met. It was also a job I had to stretch. I had to learn and stretch in doing it. It was the hardest job I've ever had, but the best job that I ever had, in the sense that I learned a lot. I learned how to help people. I learned things that didn't work and how you had to change to make some things work. And I just got exposed to so many things.
Any one person or memory stick out in your mind from that time? Something that you were able to affect?
I have several memories of that time. People don't talk about failures very much, but this is something I talk about from that era. We did a lot of good, important things and made a lot of positive changes in the city. And we have a record to prove it. They don't talk about it as much, but it's there. But I remember one of our failures and something that I really learned from it. At the time, we were alarmed at the number of low birth weight babies that were being born in the District of Columbia, and that was the time of the crack epidemic as well. Vincent Gray, who later became mayor, was head of the Department of Human Services, very committed to children, as was the mayor. And we really wanted to do something about low birth weight babies. One, we wanted to get as many of the residents who qualified for Medicaid signed up for Medicaid so they could get better health care. And we wanted some of the younger girls who were becoming pregnant to get prenatal care. Before, we wanted them to see a doctor at least 4 times before they gave birth. That was the standard. And we had a relationship, a partnership with Georgetown, and Georgetown had a bus that we were going to go around and make certain that we signed up all of these people for Medicaid, and we got these young women who were expecting to see a physician or a nurse aide. And we went all around to some of the poorest sections of the city with that bus and knocking on doors, trying to get people to sign up. And not that many did.
Why?
And, well, because they didn't really know who we were. And they didn't trust us.
So lesson learned.
It was a lesson learned that if you're going to try to get people to do real behavioral change, which is what that required, you really needed to get them to tell you how that should be done. We should have been doing some conversations with people in the beauty shop and in the clubs and talking about the problem and what would make people, what would it take to make you want to go get some prenatal care. It was a real learning experience for all of us. I think we called it a failure because our goals for that particular activity had not been met. But we were successful later in learning how to do that. And it was one of I've carried that story with me a long time, and I've told it many times over.
because people who think they know something about communities really don't know what they think they know. And people in communities know far more about what moves communities than what the experts know.
Thank you, Robert Mallett. Last but not least, we will peek into the life of Carol Thompson Cole, President and CEO of Venture Philanthropy Partners and former executive in the Barry administration of DC and staffer in the Clinton administration. She will recall her early faith connections with Asbury and in college, her executive roles in DC and national government, and her hopes for Asbury's future.
I was christened at Asbury. My grandfather, Leon Thompson, would go around and pick up his grandchildren. To this day, I don't know how we all fit in that small car.
How many
but,
were you?
Wow. Well, so in my family, over time, it's 6. And one of the families, the Marshall family, there were 8. And then there were the Madisons, there were 2. And so he would pick us up, whoever was going. We got in that car and we went to church. And he made sure that we had the worship service experience, the Sunday school experience, and the bonding experience of us as a family. I think we understood about respecting and honoring our elders and getting along and having a strong family bond. And that was the Sunday experience. Asbury was the beginning values. And that was throughout, from the time I was probably preschool through high school. My grandfather passed when I was in the 6th grade, but members of our family picked up that tradition that we had. And I think we all started moving out of the city into the suburbs as I was graduating and going to college. So it was very interesting. The rule in our family was if you didn't go to church, then you didn't get to do things that you wanted to do the next weekend. So all of us figured out we were going to church, but so we could do things. I think for me, it just became so much a part of me. So when I got to Smith College, we had Helen Hills Chapel, and there was a very ecumenical service that we had. And I got to church. There were very few African Americans that went to the church. I got there, and after a couple of Sundays, that was not the church experience that I had. They sang in Latin most of the time, and I was like, okay, I'm here. But at that point, you couldn't take a car to church. I was in Northampton, Massachusetts, and you'd have to go to Springfield to go to church. So most of the African Americans would probably go to church 2 to 3 times a year when they would have a special service for African Americans, or a gospel service, or a speaker. But I reached a point with the academic issues that I was facing and just being in a very different environment in Massachusetts that I set aside time every week and went and sat in the chapel just to be at peace and to be with my God. And one day, a woman came out and she said to me, Reverend Unsworth would like to see you. And I went back with her, and he said, I understand you come here once a week, and why do you come? And I told him because I need that peace, and I need to really pray and just be with myself. And so he said, how about if we have time together? And so Reverend Unsworth became one of the most important people in my time at Smith College, because he helped fulfill that spiritual nurturing that I needed. And I also came to appreciate my Asbury experience because it was not there to get that experience during that period of time. So that helped sustain me over the 4 years. And also during the 4 years, with all that was going on in civil rights and just activism, student activism, I wanted to go to Mississippi for a summer, and I was able to get the chapel to actually pay for me to have that experience, which was very important. So I realized how important, church faith was, and how important Asbury was to me as a person. So when I came back to Washington, I lived, as you said, I lived in Logan Circle, and every Sunday I would just walk to Asbury, and I became very reconnected with Asbury and with my church tradition.
Some gentrification was planned. We're calling for it. What are your thoughts about it now, as you think professionally as well as personally?
I think it's hard to stop progress, but I think you have to figure out how to manage it. And so I use the experience of actually the time I worked in the Clinton White House, because at that point in time, we were really struggling with the city's finances, and the control board had just been put in place. And we needed to really look at, analyze the district situation and figure out how do we generate money, how would the city not go bankrupt. So we knew that had to take place. But I think that when I look at the plan that was developed, and it was developed between the federal government and the local government, which I think is very important, one of the things that surprised me about my time at the White House is that I planned a big meeting with the president, and I was amazed at the number of business leaders and civic leaders that told me they had never been in the White House before. And so here, you know, for me, what I love about Washington and why I've stayed here and stayed engaged is I love Washington in all its dimensions. I think it makes our city so rich to be able to have a local community be the nation's capital, be the, you know, capital of the free world. But we don't figure out how to bring the pieces together and leverage the strengths of them for the entire community to benefit. And so in working with the government from the White House, we were so busy trying to save our city that in developing it and looking at how many people did you need to bring into the city, what income levels did you need to bring in, we really didn't carve out and focus on our most vulnerable people. And so a lot of why I do what I do today is how do I make sure that that doesn't get lost again? And that's the work we do here at Venture Philanthropy Partners. And so gentrification is going to happen, but you don't have to have everybody moving out of their communities, and you don't lose the culture of Washington and its neighborhoods, which is very rich.
What message of hope do you have for Asburyans?
Well, when we were doing the strategic planning process, I think that the hope is to figure out how we take the assets of Asbury and look at what we need for ourselves as well as for the community that we're in, so that we can have a new strength for the future. Asbury will not be what it was, but it can still hold on to what we've been about in our community. And you see that we have a strong history of that over time, and I hope we can get it right soon for the future.
That flavor of when you were a small child to when you were a young woman to where we are today, what does Asbury feel like to you? Just every place has a physical feel. What is it for you, and can you just talk a little bit about some of those changes?
Well, I think the first thing that I've valued is the corner that we're on in Washington, D.C. To be a downtown church that, even though we struggle, but downtown churches are struggling all over the United States, is how do we stay on that corner?
Of 11th and K.
At 11th and K Northwest. And when Curtis and I were working on Asbury Dwellings, we had someone say to us, well, maybe you all should sell one of these. You're on one corner. Do you need to be on two corners? And I said, yes, we do. These are two very important corners in the history of Washington, and they've been our church and our Asbury Dwellings, and I don't see us changing that. And I think figuring out how we maintain and sustain ourselves as the city changes. I believe new people have to be welcomed, and I think we have to take care of our own. You know, this is too valuable of a resource, and it amazes me. I mean, it's kind of sad for me to say this, but you know, it was a very diverse group of people that came to my father's funeral, and particularly whites would say, oh my gracious, this is a beautiful church. So I believe Asbury will always be a church, but I want it to be a church that respects the history of our founding and the years that we've been there. And I use an example. I vote at a church in my neighborhood, right on Calorama and Columbia Road, and we were standing in line for voting, and the neighborhood is basically gentrified, or at least that part of our community. And a white couple was walking, and they saw the picture gallery of, and they said, "This was a black church?" And I said, "Yes, this was a very strong black community at one point." And so I want to make sure that what we've built is always a part of it and not just a photo gallery on the wall, but we have integrated community in our future.
That was nice, polite applause. Could we really show some love and give applause to everybody here today? This is amazing. Now, as Adelle said, there are going to be additional clips from these interviews that will be up on YouTube. We will have, there is an entire interview that was done here. In some cases an hour, some cases a little bit more. So I hope that you will each find a way to continue filling in these stories and to hear more. And of course, the next part of our afternoon, we're going to take a brief break so you can get some refreshments, bio break, whatever you need. And we're going to invite our narrators to the stage. And we're going to have a panel where we're going to just ask a couple more questions again that will draw out more from what you just heard and cover some of the things that were not in the clips. And we will invite your participation as well to ask questions.
All right. All right, thank you very much for gathering back again so we can hear from our panelists. And Pandit and I are going to ask them a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for you to ask questions, and there will be people who can hand you a mic so that you can be heard and recorded. So, Bill Johnson, one of the clips that we didn't get to show was about your childhood and your unusual schooling situation. Can you just tell us a little bit about that, please?
Unusual schooling situation. Are we talking about kindergarten?
Use your mic, Bill. Your mic.
Oh, had a little lapse there, folks. Sorry about that. I think many of you know that I'm from a very large family. I have 10 siblings, or had 10 siblings. During the middle of World War II, things got very tight for my parents. And so my sister and I were shipped to Tennessee to live with my mother's brother and his wife to lighten the load back home in Lexington. And for 2 years, I went to a one-room schoolhouse taught by my aunt. And she taught 8 grades in one room. I remember her walking around in circles dealing with these 8 grades. I remember that very vividly. And we all got, I think, a very good education. And one indication of it was when I got back home to Lexington 2 years later, I was ahead of my 4th grade class.
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Mallett a question. See, now this is bad because y'all haven't seen the whole thing. Like, I have some inside knowledge here, but I do want to say before we get started, you may have noticed in the video clips when we interviewed Mr. Mallett in his home, and you saw that beautiful artwork that was there. He is a wonderful collector of African American and African and a diverse range of artists, but just the way he curated it and the way he displayed it, it was magnificent. And there are going to be some photos here in the archive that you can look at as well. I wanted to talk about, when we did our oral history interview, you mentioned that part of the reason you decided that Morehouse College in your words, was one of the baddest places to go. And you referenced the words of Howard Thurman, your fellow Morehouse alum. And I want to also say that, Carol, during your interview, you talked about a partnership between Asbury, Foundry, and John Wesley AME Church, and that one of the first groups of focus was around the words of Howard Thurman. So, Robert and Carol, feel free to jump in here. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of Howard Thurman, and of course the significance of partnerships that we're talking about in our church?
Well, what you're referencing was when I was just trying to decide where to go to college. Most colleges on my list were white colleges, predominantly white colleges: Carleton College, Yale College, the University of Texas, Rice University in Houston. But one day, a brochure arrived at our home, and the name of the brochure, I wish I still had it, I don't have it anymore, at least I misplaced it, was called A Morehouse Man Is. And that was the cover, and inside they do A Morehouse Man Is, and they describe what different alumni were doing. But at the very top of the brochure, on the front page, was a quote. And that quote said, "Over the heads of her students, Morehouse holds a crown that she challenges them to grow tall enough to wear." That's by Howard Thurman. I decided to go to Morehouse. And in my senior year, I met Howard Thurman for the first time. And I had a chance to go pick him up from the airport with someone else. And we, about 3 or 4 of us, were sitting with him and talked to him. And he was at his full faculty at the time. And we had a wonderful set of conversations, had dinner with him. Next day with him and Mrs. Thurman. It was very influential to me. By then I had read about 3 of his books. My favorite being, of course, Jesus and the Disinherited, but The Creative Encounter is a very close second. Centering Moment is another one. And I had a collection of Howard Thurman sermons, tapes, that were just awesome to listen to. And I think it was Thurman who gave me my sense that religion could be bigger than what I had grown up with. And that there was a more expansive way to understand spirituality and religion than the fundamental way that some of my upbringing gave me, although not all of it.
And Carol, would you like to add more about Howard Thurman, especially given the relationship that you have developed or helped develop between Asbury and Foundry United Methodist Churches and John Wesley AME Zion Church?
About a year ago, several of us from Foundry, and many of you know Foundry Church is the church from which Asbury came in 1836. John Wesley, AME Zion at 14th and Cochran, also came from Asbury Church. I don't know the exact year now, because they did not want to be governed by white pastors. So in September of 2018, several of us, lay and clergy from the 3 churches, got together and decided we would do some work around the work of Howard Thurman. So we conducted several workshops. Several of you were present at that particular time. But we looked at all of his books. Probably Jesus and the Disinherited is one that Howard Thurman carried around with him every day. The Reverend Jesse Jackson showed up one day and talked about how he carried around a copy of Jesus and the Disinherited. So we've started that work. We are continuing the work around how we can work together as 3 congregations. And I believe, according to my folks at the Baltimore Washington Conference, this is one of the first times that churches have reached outside of the denomination and formed a partnership. So you'll hear more about that. We're getting some things together. We came up with a goal, some objectives. Adelle's son is working on a logo for us, so we'll hear more about that soon.
I'd just like to add, since we're talking about Howard Thurman, is that when I got back to Asbury from graduate school, a lot of Reverend Frank Williams' sermons were very much grounded in his theology. And I would come and visit with Reverend Williams here, as I did with Reverend Unsworth at Smith College. And so that had a lot to do with me and my spirituality as well.
And we wanted to ask you a question, Carol Thompson Cole, about your work in the Clinton White House. Curious whether, a couple things, whether you and Robert Mallett were there at the same time or ran into each other in the hallway, and whether what your experience that you had in the Berry administration and local government, how it added to your ability to get things done in the White House.
We did not interact, Robert and I. Yeah, I came to the Clinton administration in the second term. So the reference was made by Robert and by me in our clips about the control board. And I think that was one of the most difficult things to happen by the federal government on the District of Columbia government and city to take our control away. But in hindsight, it was one of the most important things to happen because it really forced change. And someone made a comment, maybe it was Mr. Haynes, about the fact that you have to really change behaviors and thoughts. And so we were hiding from a lot of the things that were reality, or it was hard for us to make certain changes when we were in government. But having that control period was very important. And Dr. Bremer was the one that really just, said it's got to change, and he really drove that change. But I think it was also important for Alice Rivlin to come in behind and really think about our city and the local part of the city, and really got the community involved. And really, I think she had a lot to do with making sure things that were important to DC residents occurred through that period of time. So I think going to the Clinton White House was important because of being a native Washingtonian, one, but also having spent my time in city government and knowing all of the communities throughout the city.
We were probably in the Clinton administration at the same time, but I was gone from the city. But I was with the administration from 97 to the second term, the full second term. Yeah, we were. You were at the White House, I was at Congress.
But I don't think we worked on it.
No, we probably ran into each other.
Last year when the Department of Oral History, when they had a representative here, and they were asking us about the people that we were interviewing and, how we chose them. And we just have to say, because this is the kind of people that Asbury has. There's, just when we finished doing the interviews, we didn't pick narrators based on it, but if you looked at it, and we have 3 different people on the panel that were so significant in the District of Columbia government during some very critical times. And then you have this young lady here who's talking about, she was doing training and work from before the phone company was Verizon, right? And trying to help people, grow during this. So it's just huge. And then of course, Dr. Haynes, who is it, you heard the kinds of things that he was talking about. I mean, he has an award, the Historically Black College University Award, National Award, is named after him, the Leonard Haynes Award. So there's nobody's story that's more significant than another's. We are all children of God. But when you think about the accomplishments that do reside with each other, we should be proud, and we should take time to acknowledge that pride. Carol, we have one last question for you, Carol Travis, before we start the audience Q&A. Your work in the African American Methodist Heritage Center continues to be very important to you, does it not? Can you talk a little just about the history of the center and share the story of the man in Louisiana whose father's archives you acquired?
At the breakup of the central jurisdiction, and many of you know the central jurisdiction was the part of our history where most African Americans were relegated to a particular district. The central jurisdiction broke up in 1968, and in 1968, a group of black clergy and laity, including Bishop Farstead, Bishop Woody Wright, and some others that you may know, formed what we call Black Methodists for Church Renewal. So Black Methodists for Church Renewal is a little over 50 years old. And that was the advocacy group of African Americans in the Methodist Church. 20 years ago, Bishop Stith retired from being a bishop. I believe I have the dates right, but anyway, Bishop Stith and several other folks decided that the history of African Americans was being lost, that people were dying, their children had no idea what their parents had done, so the African American Methodist Heritage Center was formed in 2001. I had just retired from one of the phone companies, Verizon, I have to remember. And Bishop Stith approached me and asked me if I would be the administrative person for that organization. So I started out working free. My mother tells me do not take any more free work. But I've been with the organization now for just about the whole 20 years, and I do receive a small stipend now, but the stipend is not worth the work that we do. I travel all across the country talking to people about preserving the history of African Americans in the Methodist Church. I met Leonard Haynes' Uncle Roland, and Uncle Roland thought I was one of his relatives, so he would always send me messages from Dr. Haynes, and I would send a message from Uncle Roland. But the work that we do is so important to what's going on. We have all of our records preserved at the General Commission of Archives and History in Madison, New Jersey, and we have quite a trove of materials there. It's not a museum that you can go in and look at. Once a year we do have during Black History Month, I'll probably get it extended to another month now. But we display some of the artifacts that we have on display there. We have journals from the 1920s, we have journals from the 1930s. This kind of material cannot be replaced. And the story that I tell all the time, and it's on our website, is a gentleman who said to me, called me up and said, Ms. Travis, I don't want to send you anything of my father's. I have all these materials and I don't want to send you anything. So I talked to him maybe a half an hour. So he agreed to send me a small portion of what his father had done. His father was very noted in his particular area. Well, 2 years later, I believe, Katrina happened, and he lost absolutely everything. And he called me in tears, and he said, Ms. Travis, the only thing that I'm sure of are the materials that we sent to the African American Methodist Heritage Center. So within 2 days, we had copied that material and sent it to him. So my story still is, please get all of those things out of your attics, out of your basements, and send them to us so we will have them. 3 years ago, Adelle started to do a project for us. We have 40 interviews of many of our leaders in the Methodist movement. We have Bishop Woody White, we have Bishop Marcus Matthews, the late Felton May, Bishop Stith, Dr. Shropshire. We've interviewed quite a few folks. The other part that's exciting to me about that project is that we interviewed bishops' wives. Bishops' wives never had their stories told, and some of the stories that they told were just unbelievable to me. And most of the time we rah about the bishops, but the wives are really along with them. They dry their tears and keep them sane, and some of their stories are fascinating. So we're getting ready to publish those in some format. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, Adele, but it'll be published. My last thing, last week I was down on the mall. One of our former board members, Elaine Jenkins' family, has an exhibit in the African American Museum of History and Culture. The history and the exhibit is the back bus, the back panel of her father and mother's Volkswagen bus that they used to travel all over the South, registering people to vote, doing Saturday schools, all kinds of education. The back panel of that bus has been in the museum for since the museum opened. Last week, the Historic Vehicle Association had a display on the mall of the entire Volkswagen bus. It was unbelievable that they have preserved the bus, and the bus will be sent back to South Carolina to be retained by the family. I'll put that on our website. I went down there, I was so excited. I went down there Tuesday, I took 14 pictures of me standing at the bus, looking cute. But on Wednesday, the Historic Vehicle Association honored
Elaine Jenkins' mother, who would have been 109 years old, with cake and punch, and the Volkswagen bus encased in plastic sitting on the mall between the archives and the Smithsonian's. I was thrilled about that. So that's what really brings me gratification in seeing that our history is not lost. So please come see me. Be happy to take your materials, and we'll just go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. We want to open this up to you all to ask questions you may have, so we could get mics to you. Please just let us know if you want to ask a question while we're getting the mics, though. I just want to ask Bill Johnson a question while we're getting it together. Can you talk just a bit about your unprecedented jump in ranks in DC government, like what it was, and very briefly how you think that happened?
Well, that was over about an 18-year period. I don't know how to do that record. But essentially, I started out as a GS5, grade 5, one of the lower grades that you can get. And found myself fortunate enough to rise all the way to GS18 and a member of the mayor's cabinet for 10 years. I believe that's unprecedented. It could stand a challenge, but I don't think that's been duplicated in the government before me nor since me. And I'm right proud of that statistic. But there was a lot of hardship and a lot of heartache going from a 5 to an 18 and recognizing what I had to deal with in the beginning job, because they had never had Afro-American in that job before. This government was a pre-home rule government, and so it was basically white at the top, one or two black administrators, but basically a white organization. And what we had to do is navigate through that over the years to bring it about. And of course, we all know that while Mayor Walter Washington did all that he could, it wasn't until the advent of John Barrett that we began to raise the consciousness in the city and getting people to move in the upper ranks of government, as well as give people a lifeline out there in the community.
Thank you. So what questions do you all have of our panelists? Please be willing to ask questions. Anybody?
So as DC gentrifies and the culture changes in the city, not just Asbury, but so as the city changes and gentrification takes over, how do we not only keep Asbury at the corner of 11th and K, but how do we keep the culture of DC and its progressive roots leading on issues like desegregation? How do we keep that going?
I'll start. I think number one, we have to stay engaged and be vocal. You know, you have to let people know you are here. I talk a lot now about the go-go music and the response to the community across the city, that people should come into our city but respect our culture. And so I think that we want that to continue, and we have to speak out. And I think we also have to make our elected officials conscious that this is important to us as well.
Since we have three people who have worked in government on the local and federal level on the panel, people who have seen the city transition from being under the direct control of the federal government to having home rule. My question is about the next step. We've seen, again, the push to try to establish or accomplish statehood for the district. And my question is this truly an achievable goal, and what specific things could make that happen?
I was on a panel that Carol was supposed to be on also. We missed you. Yeah, on statehood. It was a group of former city administrators. They were all men, that's good. And the issue was how to be supportive of statehood. And I don't think there's any question that the people in Washington, D.C. merit, deserve, and should have congressional representation in the form of senators and a voting congressperson. What they didn't want to talk about is, I think the Bowles administration is trying to be deliberate about it, the statehood push was the commuter tax. Well, I don't know if it's a commuter tax or not, but there is no sovereignty unless you have the ability, unless you have the taxing power. The issue is about power. They have it, and we're trying to get it. And I don't think it will ever be any equity until we have power. So as people who are residents and former residents of the District of Columbia, until we have our own senators protecting our interests the way every other state does. And if that's not going to be the result, then I don't know what we're doing, because that is the only way this gets rectified. Now, interestingly enough, I think they had their first statehood hearing on the Hill. I think that has something to do with the complexion of the city. I think as the city changes, there's a lot more, people listen a lot more closely, shall we say. Now, it's not just about race, let me say that. But, and people, we have grown, we have matured, we've thought more about it, people have gotten more educated about what is possible. It is most assuredly possible. And our biggest problem is districts residents themselves who believe they're too small to be a state. States are unique. We would just be one of the more, smallness in geography would be our most unique characteristic. We are not the smallest in terms of population. So we have to sort of reorder the way we think about this as well. Now, I think it is possible to do that someday this will happen. You might get a deal like they had with Alaska and Hawaii. They let them in at the same time, so they got 2 Democrats and they got 2 Republicans. It may be Puerto Rico in the district, because Puerto Rico is probably more Republican than Democrat. So, you never know. It's certainly possible.
We have time for one more question.
I want to answer part of it. I totally agree with Robert in terms of power. I used to say all the time when I was in city government, I mean, how can you be in charge of the nation's capital, a city of politics, when you have nothing to play with? You just don't have that power authority in the Congress. But also the other issue is housing and the need for affordable housing. As Robert said in his video clip, that we expected more African Americans to move back in. I remember when we moved to Silver Spring, Maryland in 1969, my parents said as soon as they got us educated and off to college, they were moving back home. We had no idea that housing was going to go up as expensive as it did at that time. And they never came back. And so I say now, for the kids that we work with at Venture Philanthropy Partners, we're helping them to be educated. We want them to be a part of this community. And now we have to take on the issue of affordable housing so they can come back into the city and live, and then have a voice when that day comes that there is power in the district.
And parking. I remember in Carol Thompson's interview, she must have said 12,000 times, no place to park. We moved because there was no place to park. The church on Sundays is terrible because you can't find a place to park. So we have to deal with these issues. I think, Adelle, you said we have time for one more question.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much. It's been a really rich afternoon. My name's Kristen, Kristen Kump. I actually am a member down at Mount Vernon Place UMC, and I've been really blessed to know Carol Thomas for several years and have Carol be part of our racial justice reading group that has led into sort of a journey for us to really think about how are we really tackling the issues of white supremacy that MVP has lived out through its history and that I think are lived out across this city. And so I just wanted to ask, naming as I feel like, both one of the few white folks in the room and also one of the few younger people in the room, sort of messages that you all would like to share out to the DC community of younger folks and of white folks, especially folks who don't know your stories. And I'm really struck by the other Carol, what you mentioned in the video about how tragic it is that there are probably so many folks look a lot like me wandering around the city who do not know the deep stories of DC, and because they don't know the history, don't realize the injustice that they're playing a part in every day, and therefore aren't taking steps to do things like look at affordable housing, like look at other issues in this city, and working together across race and economic lines to do something more. And so just wanted to see, as I go back and report back to sort of, our reading group and our action group and some of my other friends in the city, if there are any messages y'all would like to leave us with for folks who look like me.
Your answer in that people have to be open to learn and not so quick to say it never happened before. I'm in so many rooms and people will say they never did this in district government, and I have to raise my hand because it's very personal to me and to the three of us what we did. We worked all the time, we worked hard on the issues, and people think you never did anything about this, or we have to invest in your kids because you haven't taken care of them. I mean, we worked hard, we dealt with the circumstances at different times, they were different, and we did the best we could in that. And I think that having dialogues and learning, but being willing to listen and ask people about their community and what needs to be done is very
important. You've heard referenced in several of the narrators' interviews about being on this corner at 11th and K. We are really trying very hard to be a church that is open to all of the community. Our entire neighborhood has changed, of course. One of our biggest challenges is attracting people who live near this church to come to this church and not get in their car and drive to Metropolitan on Nebraska Avenue or walk a mile up the road to Foundry. That is a big challenge. Now, Mount Vernon may be having the same challenge we're having. But worship, we've never been a segregated church, as I think Carol said. Everybody was allowed to come to Asbury. No one ever had to worship separately in a balcony at Asbury. We've had a set of white ministers here, not as the senior pastor, but we've been a welcoming church for a long time. One of the messages is, come and see, come here. Help us to make your experience better, your spiritual life better, and help to strengthen ours as well. Because this is a place where you would be welcome.
Just one thing, we've talked a lot about sitting down, talking to people, hearing people's stories. I think that has impacted me more than anything else in the last 5 years. I've sat down across from people at Foundry I did not know, and I do understand more about the issues that are going on. Some of our readings at Mount Vernon in our racial reconciliation group that Kimberly mentioned Krista mentioned a minute ago. The book we're reading this month is called Chocolate City, and it's a book called Race and Democracy in the Nation's Capital. It's this thick, but it's a wonderful reference. So if you're looking for some books to read, I have a list that I can provide for you. The other thing, in our work with Foundry and John Wesley AME Zion, one of the things we're looking at is looking at how affordable housing is affecting so many folks. So we have a couple things on the back burner that we're going to look at involving interviewing folks at some of these places that are closing. So I'm sticking close to them. Foundry has some money, and we have some money. John Weston has some money, but it's really invaluable with the experiences that we're getting. So I'm going to continue to do that work and report back as we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to be with you this evening. I'm Louise Wright from 19th Street Baptist Church. And it's interesting that the same social injustice that you spoke of, it was the beginning of the 6 major African American churches worship. Asbury, 19th Street, Metropolitan, and we all came from the same kind of social injustice. And here we find, almost 200 years later, it's the same thing. But I applaud what you say, we must start something. We just can't wait. As the young lady said before, it's panic time. We have to really do. But what also struck me is the fact that you are putting great emphasis on the preservation of history. And I know that until we started our reconciliation conversation with First Baptist at 16th and O, that was our mother church, we really didn't have the great sense of value of the written record of what we do have. So I applaud all of you who are doing oral histories. We've started that thanks to Dr. David Peterson here at our church as well, and we welcome joining you in any efforts.
All right, so if there are no more questions, then we're going to turn it over to Ruth Robinson. Come on up and give her thing.
Can I just say one thing? And I know I speak for the other narrators, and I don't usually do that, but of this I am sure. We are so grateful to Ruth and Adelle and Pandit and all of the people that James and others who worked on this. It was an extraordinary, and Sandy, it was an extraordinary thing to put all of this together, and you all know how hard it is to schedule people to come out to my house and someone's office. It's just a labor of love and faithfulness that we appreciate and we thank you for. And as Carol just reminded me, we are very grateful for the support of our pastor, Dr. Mills, who really has emphasized this project and these efforts, and we thank her for her leadership.
I'm here at this moment to present our narrators with a package that we'd like them to have, and the hope that they'll keep them. It is a copy of their interviews, and it's printed on archival paper, and it's stored in archival material. So anyway, we present it, and later on we do hope to give them a copy of the entire videos, which will go along with this transcript that they'll be getting today. Carol Reverend Mills, I'm wondering if you'd like to have something to say to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Pictures of you so that I can put this on Facebook and brag about what's happening at Asbury. But I just want to, again, express appreciation for the team who's worked on the oral history project, and also express congratulations to those who are honored to be interviewed and have been narrators. And thank you all for coming out to support this project as well. I'm in the wrong place, huh? That's really all I have to say. Thank you. Sure, we can say a prayer. Lord God, we are so grateful for the rich history here at Asbury, for the many gifts we are blessed with in the form of your children. We pray, God, for continued strength to be the church here at 11th and K, to be a bright light, to be a beacon, to draw others to you. And now, as we all prepare to go forth, go with us. May we be wonderful witnesses in the world. Amen.
Amen.